It's strange how ordinary memories can twist into something darker when you look back on them. When I think about my school days now, I don't remember the usual stuff people talk about, friends, classes, or games. What comes back to me most are the nights I stayed late in that old school building. And one night in particular that I still can't forget. This happened during my sophomore year of high school. I wasn't the type of student who liked staying late, but I had joined the yearbook committee and we were always behind schedule. On most days, a few of us would stay after school to edit photos and arrange layouts in the computer lab. It wasn't unusual to be there until the custodian started locking up. But that one evening, I ended up being the last one left. We had been working on a spread for the sports teams, and everyone slowly packed up around 6:30. The sun had already set, and the sky outside the windows was this dull, fading blue. I told myself I'd only need 15 more minutes to finish cropping some pictures, so I waved goodbye and stayed. 15 minutes turned into almost an hour. By the time I noticed the time on the corner of the computer screen, it was close to 7:30. The halls outside were completely silent, and the lights in most parts of the building had already gone out. I knew the side doors would still be unlocked because the custodian didn't lock them until after 8, so I wasn't too worried. Still, there's something unsettling about being alone in a place that's supposed to be full of noise and people. The school felt wrong without the voices, without the footsteps echoing through the halls. Every creak of the old vents, every hum of the fluorescent lights seemed too loud. I packed up my things quickly and left the computer lab. The hallway was dim, only half the lights on. I remember my sneakers squeaking on the polished floor as I walked, and how the sound bounced off the lockers in a way that made it seem like someone else was walking just behind me. I told myself not to be stupid. When I passed by the science wing, I noticed one of the classroom doors was slightly open. That was strange. Teachers always locked them before leaving, and I knew for sure that no one from our committee had used that room. I slowed down, glanced inside. The room was dark except for a faint glow from a fish tank in the back corner. The biology teacher kept some fish there for her class. Their movement cast little shifting shadows against the walls, which at first looked like people moving. I stood there watching for a few seconds, my nerves already on edge. Then, from the far side of the room, I heard a chair scrape against the floor. Not loud, but sharp enough to cut through the silence. I froze. There wasn't supposed to be anyone left in the building besides me, and maybe the custodian. I leaned into the doorway a little, squinting into the dark, but all I could see were rows of desks and the faint reflections from the fish tank glass. "Hello?" I said, my voice quieter than I meant it to be. No answer. I didn't step inside. Something about the air felt heavy, like the room itself didn't want me there. I pulled the door shut, making sure it latched, and walked faster toward the main exit. The weirdest part, though, the part that stuck with me, was that just before the door clicked shut, I swear I heard another chair move, like someone was slowly dragging it closer to the front of the room. I didn't look back. That was only the first time I felt like the school was keeping something from me. At the time, I told myself it was nothing, just my imagination. But that night was the beginning of everything else that came after. After that night with the open science room, I tried to laugh it off the next day. I told a couple of friends about the fish tank shadows and the scraping chair, but they just made jokes about me being jumpy. I let it go, even though something about it still bothered me. But then, a few weeks later, it happened again. We were behind schedule with the yearbook, again, so our advisor convinced a few of us to stay late. There were 3 of us this time, all crammed into the computer lab, eating cold pizza while we sorted through photos. Around 6:45, my 2 friends decided to leave together. One of them had a ride waiting, and the other lived just a few blocks away. I stayed. I told them I'd only be another 10 minutes. That's what I always said. The building felt emptier than usual that night. Maybe it was because most of the classrooms had their doors wide open, dark and hollow, like little caves. I remember walking down the hallway to use the bathroom before leaving, and noticing how quiet everything was. Not even the custodian's vacuum, just the faint hum of the old lights overhead. The bathroom I usually used was the one by the gym, but when I pushed on the door, it didn't budge. A handwritten, out of order sign was taped across it, the paper curling at the edges. That was odd, because I'd used it earlier that same afternoon. So I walked farther down to the second floor bathroom near the math wing. That hallway was darker, most of the lights off, but the bathroom door opened easily enough. Inside, the air was colder than the rest of the school. The tiled walls seemed to hold the chill. Only one of the fluorescent bulbs was flickering above the sinks, buzzing faintly like an insect trapped in glass. I went into the stall at the end, set my bag on the hook, and sat down. A minute later, I heard the bathroom door creak open. I assumed it was the custodian, but I didn't hear footsteps, just the door moving on its hinges and then clicking shut again. I waited. Silence. The stalls next to me were empty. I'd checked when I walked in. The flickering light hummed steadily, broken only by the occasional drip of water from the sink. And then, from the stall beside me, I heard a soft tap, like knuckles against the metal partition. Not loud, just enough to make sure I noticed. I froze completely, holding my breath. A few seconds passed, then another tap, slower this time, dragging along the metal like fingernails instead of knuckles. I wanted to say something, ask if someone was there, but the words stuck in my throat. My heart was pounding so hard it almost drowned out the sound. I slid my phone from my pocket, my hands shaking, and turned on the flashlight. The bright circle of light cut across the bottom of the stall, the gap between the floor and the metal wall. Nothing. No shoes, no shadow. Just my own light bouncing off the tiles. But the tapping came again, right at ear level this time. A sharp rap, rap, rap directly against the wall I was leaning on. That's when I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my bag, shoved the stall door open, and practically ran out into the hallway. I didn't even check behind me. I just kept moving, all the way to the exit, fumbling with my keys like I had the first time. When I finally stepped outside, the air felt warm compared to the chill in that bathroom. I stood there for a long minute, staring back at the second floor windows. Nothing moved. The next morning, I asked one of the teachers if the gym bathroom was still out of order. He looked at me confused. "No, it was open yesterday and today," he said. But when I walked past it between classes, I saw the same sign taped to the door, out of order. Except this time, when I tugged at the handle, it swung open easily. Lights on, nothing wrong inside. The sign wasn't even there anymore. I stopped going to the bathroom alone after that. By the time all this had happened, the science room, the bathroom, I had already convinced myself that maybe I was just overthinking things. Schools are old, they make noises, lights flicker, doors creak. That's what I told myself. But then the basement door started opening on its own. Most students didn't even know our school had a basement. It wasn't on the regular floor maps, and teachers rarely mentioned it. It was mostly used for storage, boxes of old textbooks, broken desks, outdated projectors. The custodians went down there sometimes, but for the rest of us, the door at the end of the north hallway was just there, always locked, always closed. At least that's what I thought. It was another late night, maybe around 7:15. I'd finished with the yearbook edits earlier than usual and was heading down the north hallway to cut across to the parking lot. The corridor was long and narrow, with trophy cases on one side and lockers on the other. Half the lights were off, so the glass of the cases reflected me in broken pieces as I walked past. That's when I noticed the basement door. It wasn't closed. It was open just a crack, maybe a few inches, with a faint draft coming through it. I actually stopped walking when I saw it, because in my head, that door was always supposed to be locked. I'd passed it dozens of times, and I couldn't remember a single time it hadn't been shut tight. I thought maybe the custodian was inside, so I stepped closer, leaning toward the gap. The smell hit me first, stale, damp, almost moldy, like old paper left in a wet box. "Hello?" I called softly. No answer. I pushed the door a little wider. The stairwell beyond it dropped steeply into darkness. No light switch on the wall that I could find. Just the metal handrail and the steps disappearing down into black. I should have left it. I know that now. But for some reason, I couldn't shake the thought that maybe someone had left it unlocked by accident. Maybe I should close it, just to be safe. So I reached out, placed my hand against the heavy door, and started to push it shut. That's when I heard it. From deep below, faint but unmistakable, the sound of footsteps, slow, heavy, and uneven, like someone limping. They were coming up the stairs. I froze, my hand still on the door. My brain scrambled for an explanation. Custodian? Teacher? Another student messing around? But the footsteps didn't sound right. They echoed strangely, dragging out longer than they should have, as though the stairwell itself was stretching the sound. One step, then another, then another. I backed away quickly, my heart thudding in my chest. The door creaked slightly as the draft shifted, but I didn't wait to see what was coming. I turned and walked fast down the hallway, trying not to break into a full sprint. When I reached the end of the hall, I glanced back. The door was still open, wider now than before. I swear I could see the faint outline of a shadow stretched across the floor, long and thin, reaching out past the doorway, even though there was no light behind it. I left the building without looking back again. The next day, I tried to check. I walked by the north hallway between classes, pretending like I was headed somewhere else. The basement door was shut tight, padlocked, with a bright red sign that said, "Authorized personnel only." No crack, no draft, no way anyone could have gone inside the night before. But I know what I heard, and I know that something was on those stairs, coming up toward me. That was the night I started dreading being alone in the building, because I couldn't stop thinking, if I hadn't left in time, what would I have seen at the top of those steps? By that point, I had already started avoiding certain hallways at night, the science wing, the bathrooms, the north hallway with the basement door. But there were nights when I couldn't avoid the library. The yearbook advisor liked to keep old editions and stacks of photographs in the library's back office. If we needed reference pages or old team pictures, that was the only place to get them. I didn't mind the library during the day. It was big, bright, and always full of people. But at night, it was different. The library at dusk felt wrong. That evening, our advisor had left early, and I was the only one left behind again. I had been asked to dig through the storage room in the back of the library to find pictures from a graduation 10 years ago. The sky outside had already dimmed to gray-blue, and by the time I unlocked the library doors with the spare key, the place was empty and hushed. The main lights weren't even on, just the emergency bulbs glowing faintly near the exits. The shelves cast long shadows, and the air had that dry paper smell mixed with a faint trace of dust. I set my bag down near one of the tables and made my way to the back office. The office itself was cramped, filled with filing cabinets and boxes stacked against the walls. A single lamp on the desk gave me just enough light to sort through folders. I had been digging through one of the boxes for maybe 15 minutes when I heard the sound of pages turning. It wasn't loud, but in the silence of the library, it stood out. A slow, deliberate rustling, like someone leafing through a book. I froze, my hand halfway inside the box. The office door was open just a crack, and through it, I could see the faint outlines of the shelves in the main library. Nobody else should have been there. The doors were locked, the lights mostly off. Another rustle, then a thump, as if a book had been closed. "Hello?" I called out, my voice catching a little. No answer. I stood up, walked to the doorway, and pushed it open wider. The library stretched out in front of me, dim and quiet, the rows of shelves disappearing into shadow. I didn't see anyone. For a moment I thought maybe I'd imagined it. Maybe the sound had been from the air vent or a book sliding off the pile. But as I stepped out into the main library, I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. On the nearest table, a book lay open. I hadn't put it there. I hadn't touched anything outside the office. I walked closer, hesitant, and saw that it was an old yearbook, our school's, but one of the editions from decades ago. The pages were open to the class photos section, faces staring out in black and white. As I leaned over, I noticed something strange. One of the faces had been scratched out, not printed that way, but carved into the paper, deep enough to tear through the page. The lines weren't neat. They were jagged, almost violent. I felt a chill crawl up my neck. I turned quickly, scanning the shelves again, and that's when I heard it. Footsteps, slow, measured, on the other side of the stacks. Not running, not rushing, just walking. I couldn't see who it was. The shelves blocked my view, but the steps moved steadily, row by row, getting closer. I didn't wait. I grabbed my bag off the table and backed toward the exit. My shoes squeaked against the floor, and as if in response, the footsteps on the other side stopped. Just stopped completely. The silence that followed was worse than the sound. I fumbled with the keys, unlocked the door, and pushed it open. The second I stepped into the hallway, the door swung shut behind me with a heavy thud, like it had been pushed from the inside. I didn't go back to the library for weeks after that. When I finally did, during regular class hours, I looked for that yearbook. I searched every shelf I could, checked the reference section, even asked the librarian. She told me she'd never seen a copy that old in their collection. But I know I didn't imagine it. I can still picture the page in my head, the class photo rows, the faces staring out, and that one scratched-out smile. By the time spring came, I was worn down. The late nights, the strange noises, the places in that school that no longer felt normal. I couldn't shake the feeling that the building was watching me. I didn't say that to anyone, of course. People would have laughed. But every time I stayed after dark, I found myself moving faster, avoiding certain hallways, keeping my back to the walls so nothing could come up behind me. The final straw came one Thursday night in April. The yearbook deadline was only a few days away, and our advisor asked me to stay late to finish the last layouts. She gave me her keys, since she had to leave early, and told me to lock up when I was done. I agreed, even though I hated the thought of being the last one inside. By 8 o'clock, the building was completely empty. My laptop screen was the only light in the computer lab, casting a pale glow over the desks. I kept telling myself I'd leave in 10 minutes, but I was deep in the work and didn't notice the time slipping by. It must have been close to 8:30 when I heard it. A loud bang from down the hallway, sharp enough to make me jump. Not like a locker slamming shut. This was heavier, deeper, like a door being thrown against the wall. I froze, my hands hovering over the keyboard. Another bang, closer this time. I stood up slowly, straining to listen. The hallway outside was dark, except for one flickering light near the exit. I picked up my phone, the flashlight ready, and stepped into the corridor. The air felt heavier out there, almost damp, like it did near the basement door. My footsteps echoed too loudly as I crept forward. When I reached the corner, I saw something that made my stomach twist. The basement door, the one that was always locked, was wide open again. This time, though, I didn't just hear footsteps. I heard breathing, slow, ragged, uneven, echoing up the stairwell. "Hello?" My voice cracked when I said it. The breathing stopped. I don't know why I didn't just run. Maybe it was stubbornness, maybe curiosity, maybe the part of me that wanted proof that I wasn't just imagining things. I pulled the door almost shut, then turned and walked quickly back toward the lab. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the keys. When I got back inside, I started packing everything into my bag as fast as I could. That's when I noticed the window. The computer lab had a small glass window looking into the hallway, and pressed against it, just for a second, was a face. Pale, expressionless, with eyes that didn't seem to blink. I stumbled back, knocking over a chair, but when I looked again, the window was empty. Nothing there. That was enough. I didn't care about finishing the work. I grabbed my bag, bolted from the room, and ran straight out the front doors. I didn't even lock up. I didn't stop running until I was in my car, with the doors locked and the engine started. When I came back the next morning, the principal was waiting. He was angry that the building had been left unlocked, but when I tried to explain, he just gave me a look like I'd lost my mind. I didn't argue. We submitted the yearbook on time, somehow, but after that night, I never stayed late again. If I couldn't finish during the day, I just left it undone. I avoided the library, the bathrooms, the north hallway, and I never went near the basement door again. The strangest part? A month later, at the end of the school year, the janitors sealed that basement door permanently. They bolted it shut and put up a new wall over the frame. Students walking past wouldn't even know it had ever been there, but I know. And sometimes, even now, I dream about that place. The library shadows, the cold bathroom, the sound of chairs moving when no one was inside, and the slow breathing from the bottom of the stairs. People always tell me high school is supposed to be the best time of your life. But when I look back on mine, all I remember are the nights I stayed too long in that building, and the feeling that something in there was waiting for me to stay just a little longer.